Hello everyone, this is Steve Allen. I am the Regional Manager for our Northwest, Town Lake, and Douglasville offices, and I'm going to be going through the purchase and sale agreement. We're going to start with paragraph A1. Just keep in mind that your purchase and sale agreement is divided into three parts, A, B, and C. B is going to relate back to the items from your first part, A, and C is basically the legalese for the contract. So we're going to start with A1, the purchase and sale. The property address on A. This is your property address. Basically, you're going to get this from your sellers. You do want to verify this to make sure it is correct from the tax records so that the attorneys, when you go to closing, they have that correct information. Also, the MLS number, that will be filled in once you actually put the listing into FMLS, and then your tax parcel ID number, which you will get from Reallist. Going to section B, the legal description, you're going to check one of the three boxes. You do not want to check two of the boxes or more than one, and that it could cause a conflict if you do have conflicting information between the boxes checked. So you're going to choose one of the three. Your first option is an exhibit. This is typically a copy of the legal description from the seller. Typically it's an exhibit A from their warranty deed or something similar to that. 2 is where the deed is, or the legal description is recorded, and that is going to simply be a deed book or a page number. And typically you'll find this on a copy of their warranty deed. And then section 3, which is the most commonly used, is the full legal description. Typically you can get this from the seller's warranty deed. If that is not available to you, you can get this, and you'll need to check with your office to make sure you do have this information or this website available to you, and that is www.gsccca.org. You will need a login information, username, and password for that, but check with your office to see if that is available to you. And you can find that legal description from there as well. In addition to that, you also have access through the tax records through Reallist as well. But you do want to make sure you do have a legal description, as that is a very big part of the contract and is required in your contracts to make it a valid one. Your next is going to be your purchase price, and this is basically what your seller, or your buyer is going to offer on the property. 3 is your closing costs. This is an amount that the seller will contribute towards your buyer's closing costs. Typically you want to refer to the lender, which we hope will be Home Services Lending, but you want to refer to them to see what that number should be, as there are certain requirements. Some of the different loan types have limits on that, so you want to make sure that you're getting the right amount for your buyers at the time of the offer, because that is something that is hard to change and go back. Your next section is number 4, your closing date. This is going to be the date that you're going to do your actual closing on. You want to make sure that this day is not a holiday or a weekend, so check your calendar and make sure that it's a day that works for your buyer, but as well, it is not on a day that you're not going to be able to close, which is typically weekends and holidays. B is your possession of the property. This is going to be when that buyer actually takes possession of the property, when the seller has to be out. If they're going to be at the closing table, your buyer wants them out at the closing, then you're going to check in the box number 1. If the seller is going to be staying for any amount of time past the closing, then you will check 2. If that seller is going to stay for any reason after the closing, you want to make sure you do attach F-140, the temporary occupancy agreement for the seller after closing. so that it creates a relationship between that buyer and that seller. So you want to make sure, and that's why it is noted here to make sure to attach that. And that is something that's very important in case that seller decides all of a sudden they don't want to move out. It gives the buyer some legal remedies to get the seller out of the property, which we hope does not happen. Number 5 is the holder of the earnest money. We want to make sure to put that in here, who's going to be holding the earnest money. Of course, we prefer Berkshire Hathaway Home Services to hold the earnest money in any cases. Just as a reminder, we do have a new form that if a closing attorney or an attorney or someone else is going to be holding the earnest money, there is a new form that has come out that states a relationship between the holder of the earnest money and all parties to the contract, so you want to make sure to add that. Then number 6 is your closing firm. Of course, we always want to see Wiseman Law in here. So this is whoever's going to be closing that transaction needs to be listed here. Like I said, we would love for that to be Wiseman. Number 7 is your earnest money. You're going to check, first of all, if it's a check or wire transfer. We do not accept cash, so for no reason do not accept cash. If a buyer tries to give you cash, tell them no, they need to go get a certified funds or a money order. If it is going to be paid in the form of a money order, you need to list that either in C here or write out a special stipulation that states that the earnest money has been paid in the form of a money order. So either check, wire transfer are the two most commonly though. You're going to check A, B, or C. If you have the earnest money at the time of the offer, then you're going to check A and list out that amount. If it is B, B is anytime after the offer date. Basically let's say someone has to transfer funds and they're not going to be able to pay it at the time of the offer, then basically you would put in here the amount that they're going to pay and how many days from binding agreement they have to actually give that to you. And then C is any other special circumstances as far as the payment of the earnest money is concerned would be listed there. 8A is the due diligence period. Typically this number is going to be anywhere from 7 to 14 days, but this is a negotiable item. But this is the time frame that the buyer has to do all of their due diligence, such as inspections and those things. B is another option that we rarely see, but this is basically an option in case they are wanting to put up some option money, which is non-refundable, to make their offer stronger, and you would just check those boxes that apply there. 9 is a very important paragraph to check off. If that property that your buyer is buying is built prior to 1978, you're going to check was, and you're going to attach the lead-based paint exhibit, a very important one. If it was not built prior to 1978, it was built after, then you would check was not, and you just move on. But if you do, if your buyer is buying a property that was built prior to 1978, you would check was and attach that lead-based paint exhibit. Number 10 is your agency relationship, brokerage relationship. Regardless of which one you're working with, the seller or the listing, basically you're going to check if you're representing that client. And remember, a client is someone that you're representing, a customer is someone that you do not represent. A client is going to be someone that you're representing. So if in the case of, if you've got the buyer, you're going to check representing buyer as a client. For representing the seller, you're going to check representing seller as a client. And that's where you actually have a brokerage agreement in place. If you're not working with the buyer or the seller as a client and you're just working with them as a customer, let's say as buyer calls off of your sign in the front yard, that buyer would be a customer. So you would check number 2 here. And the same for the seller as well, in case, like a for sale by owner or something like that. 3 is your dual agency. While as a company we do allow dual agency, it's not something that we encourage. And if you're going to, please document. But if you're representing both parties, you would check number 3 on both of these, both the selling broker and the listing broker. And then number 4 is one that we hopefully will see more and more. This is where Berkshire Hathaway Home Services Georgia Properties agents are involved on both sides of the transaction. So one has the buyer, one has the seller. That is called designated agency, and you would check number 4, and you would list out basically the name. If, let's say in this case, I was working with the buyer, and then let's say John was working with the listing broker, then the selling broker, you would put number 4, my name, you would put Steve Allen, and on the listing broker, you would list out the listing agent, let's say John Morris, okay? And then C is basically any type of material relationship that you have with either party involved. So if you're related to them or in any way, that type of thing, you would list that out. Let's say a business partner or something of the sorts, you would list that out. Number 11 is your time limit of the offer. This is where you're going to allow the seller a certain amount of time to consider this offer and to negotiate it. So you want to make sure you do give yourself enough time for this, for the offer to be negotiated between the buyer and the seller. But you would list that time frame out here. Your next section that you're going to fill out is basically your exhibits and addendas. Basically, this section is the parts where you're adding exhibits, your conventional loan financing, your seller's disclosure statement, your community association disclosure, any other forms that you're attaching to your agreement, you're going to list here. You're going to check the boxes that do apply, and if there's a form here that is, let's say, not listed here, you're going to go down to the bottom of this section and you'll list those here under other. Now, as far as lettering, numbering or lettering these exhibits, making them part, you see here we've made the Community Association Disclosure Exhibit A. Exhibits are letters, addendums, or amendments to the contract are numbers. It's the preferred method. So you're going to, let's say if you have the Community Association Disclosure, it's Exhibit A here. Then you have the conventional loan contingency exhibit, that would be, let's say, B. That would be Exhibit B. And then let's say you have the seller's property disclosure statement. You would check that and make it Exhibit C. Then further down, you do have your special stipulations. Just keep in mind any exhibits override the purchase and sale agreement, and then special stipulations override exhibits and the body of the contract as well. Your exhibits are going to be those things that you're adding. We prefer you not to write your own exhibits if you can help that. You do have a pre-select set of special stipulations that are available to you, and you can click on the box there to add those exhibits as we're doing here, and you can choose which exhibits you would like to add. So if let's say we're going to add the due diligence inspection one, we would choose that and then drop it in, copying and pasting. So basically any special stipulations that you're adding, you pre-select those and then just drop those into your section there. And then if you've got additional pages, you would check either box, or if you do not, you check the box that does apply to that. Then on your signature page, this is the page where the buyers and the sellers will sign, as well as yourselves. Basically, you're going to fill out the information that does apply. And coming down to the seller broker and the listing broker information, make sure to list out the brokerage firms, the listing and the buyer's agent are. One important piece of information that is Georgia law is that your real estate license does have to be included, but for both sides, and also the brokerage license number, which is down at the bottom of the form. So that is shown here. So you will list out the brokerage and your salesperson's information, and then list out your phone numbers, your fax numbers, and emails, and those things. So, and then the binding agreement, once the contract is accepted, the person that is receiving the accepted contract will actually fill in the binding agreement date and fill in their name. So, and that is pretty much the purchase and sale agreement.